Welcome to the Ottawa Canadian Film Festival Filmmaker panel. I'm Hingman Leung and I'm your host today. The Ottawa Canadian Film Festival is a cultural not-for-profit organization whose mission is to recognize, promote, and celebrate the art of cinema by showcasing Canadian films and filmmakers. The festival gratefully acknowledges the financial support of the City of Ottawa and the Ontario Arts Council. This year, our festival is entirely online due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. The films have been split into 3 screening weekends, and we've just finished the second one. Week 2 of the Ottawa Canadian Film Festival featured 2 documentary films, and I have with me today the filmmakers involved in these films, and I'm super excited to chat with them and ask them questions that you sent in through the audience Q&A. Our documentary panelists are Tom Knowlton, director of StreetSauce, Public Art in Waterloo Region. And from Inhale, we have Derek Lamoureux, who is the producer. Before we get into your questions, I'd like our panelists to introduce themselves and tell us a bit about their filmmaking journey so far.
Okay, well, thanks. It's nice to be with you, and thanks so much for having our film in your festival. I'm Tom Knowlton. I'm in Kitchener-Waterloo area, and I work with my colleague and friend Paul Campsell. We are both co-producers and co-directors of StreetSauce, and we've done a lot of work together over the last 10 years or so. So in Kitchener and Waterloo, we have the Region of Waterloo Arts Fund, and they're terrific at finding sources of money and giving it to artists who submit ideas that they want to work on. And so, you know, they've really helped us a lot. Paul and I have done a few films together, and the Arts Fund has helped us out with those in the past. This was a film we started, I think, maybe 2.5 years ago. And it's about public art in Waterloo Region. I spent some time thinking about this as I was driving around in the car or walking around, and I'd look at a piece of art, public art in the area, and I kind of wonder to myself, well, where did that come from? And why did I know more about this in general? And then I started to think that there were a lot of pieces around. And so it occurred to both Paul and I that this might be a good idea for a film to explore what's out there and see what kind of mischief we could get into in terms of uncovering some controversies and talking to artists and finding out who's out there. So that's kind of what happened.
Well, thanks so much for screening the film, and for everyone that's watching, thanks for taking the time. My name is Derek Lamoureux. I'm a director and producer in London, Ontario. The film Inhale, actually, I was the producer on, along with good friends of mine, Brian Chambers, who is the director, and Nick Pilecki, who is the DP of the film. The three of us, you know, we collectively work in the commercial space. So we do commercials on an ongoing basis, and this was really our first, more or less a passion project and film to create. So the idea actually stemmed from a conversation that Nick had shared with Brian and I, and through Nick's connection with his kids or carriers of the gene, they don't actually have CF. He wanted to do something along the lines of raising awareness. And then we got connected with the Chappelle family, and then the rest is history from there.
Okay, and for those not familiar, CF is cystic fibrosis, right? And that's what the film talks about.
Yeah. So CF is cystic fibrosis. It's a genetic disease that affects many Canadians. I encourage you, once you watch the film, to do some looking into it, because it's I didn't know much about it before we did the film, and I learned a lot.
So we have 2 documentaries in this weekend. I learned a lot from both. They're both very different in style and also what kind of issues it gets into. We did receive some questions from the audience, from our online audience Q&A. So I'm going to read the first one, and it's directed to Derek. For Inhale, how have the Chappelle family reacted to the film? What challenges did you face working with a story with real people behind it?
All right. Well, I mean, I would say most documentaries in general, you're working with real people most of the time, or an element to a story that you have to tell. So first and foremost, I would say that the story that we wanted to tell of the Chappelle family was the most truthful and accurate to resonate with people. And I mean, all of that credit goes to Brian, the director, on pulling that out. But when you work with a real family, it comes with working with everyday challenges from a producing standpoint, which would be scheduling. They live a very active lifestyle, but they were more than accommodating when we said, here's our first shoot day, the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh. And honestly, the first day I remember walking in the door, it was Kaylee's birthday. So there's a birthday scene. It has a small section in the film. And that was the first day I had met her. And she lit up like this child was so excited to have us there and for us to experience her birthday with her. Pre-COVID, that seemed like a very normal concept. But when we showed up, she was excited to have us there. And then every shoot after that, it was like she and the family were looking forward to having a film crew there, which honestly made a world of difference. When you're doing a documentary, to have them as invested and interested in, willing to play ball, made our jobs way easier. We couldn't have made a film that, I think is touching to the end viewer without their buy-in, essentially. I remember hearing from Kaylee's mom when it was made, and both of them were, Alicia and Ron, her parents, were both very emotional and enjoyed the film. And since then we've stayed in contact with them, as needed. And this film festival journey has been great because every time it gets shown, not only do people get to hear their story and we get to celebrate that success with them, but we also get to raise awareness for cystic fibrosis.
And have they seen the film once it was completed?
Yeah, so it's I believe they saw it. They saw a screening link before it went live. So they have seen it multiple times.
Can you share a bit about what their reaction was, if they had any?
So the screening link, I believe, was sent by Brian. So I don't know the exact initial reaction that they had to it. I was pulled into another project at the time, so they were handling really the talking with them portion then. But I know through messages that we had on Facebook, Alicia and I and Brian and Nick, she was very excited and she was very appreciative of the story that we told about their family.
I really appreciated how intimate the story was, because from the audience perspective, it was really like looking into this family's life and getting really rather quickly a look into what their life is like. And so I think you've done a really good job with that.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's we really wanted to be involved in their lives and capture as much as possible, but not invasive. And that was a big thing that Brian pushed for in every scene.
Mm-hmm. It was very impactful. And so, Tom, in your documentary, it's a broader question addressing kind of what's happening in the region of Waterloo, and it involved a lot of people shooting outdoors, shooting in public. It's a different way of showing or sharing the story of an issue that you want to get to know a little bit more about. Can you tell us more about that process? What inspired you to take that approach, And if you can share some of your experience kind of connecting with people in the public, which would be, you know, the other side of filming a documentary, making connections kind of on the fly,
Yeah.
as compared to, you know, previously in Inhale, we heard from Derek talk about, you know, the importance of that relationship with your subjects.
An intimate relationship, yeah. Right, so StreetSauce would be different in that way. I think you're right. You know, the central question that we either started with or arrived to was, what is the value of art for all of us? And for this, we're looking at the public space, you know, in Kitchener, Waterloo, and Cambridge. Is it, it's about the art that's in front of us on the streets in a lot of cases, but other places too that where there's public access. So that's the question. But then in terms of how we designed our work, it was kind of like, well, it's out there. Let's go shoot a lot of it if we can. And how are we going to decide which artists to talk to, or which city government people to talk to about policies in terms of public art, or which graffiti artists we're going to find? Well, once you start asking some of these people, you'll get some names. And eventually we decided to focus on a few, just a few. And we got so much with just those few that we realized we couldn't go too broad. Better to keep it with a few great interviews from the kind of categories, from the dimension, the range of art that we were seeing, and then fill it in with as many shots of actual pieces of art that we could, to kind of give local community members a sense of they're watching their own community in art on the screen. So it is kind of a local project in that way. But the larger question, the larger story is, again, what's the value of art for all of us? What does it give our cities? What does it give our minds as we see it and absorb it?
Thanks for sharing that. And while you were talking about your experience developing this film, one of the things that made me think about, and for both of your films, is that in the process of making a documentary film, you meet a lot of people, you hear a lot of things that are happening in their lives, and the final product doesn't show kind of the full spectrum of everything that you've captured. And so I want to hear a little bit about your experiences kind of deciding what to keep in the film and what to leave out, what that process was like, and is there something that you wished you could have put in the film?
Well, I would say that our interviews were long form, but not too long. And so a lot of what we received from our interviewees, we used. But as you edit and put things together, you start to see patterns, and you find directions that you want to pursue and follow. Before we started shooting, we didn't know of any controversies, and we really didn't find controversies other than things like how much money to devote to new art projects in the public sphere and that kind of thing. But there was one piece of art that cropped up in a number of interviews, and it's one that people have made jokes about, not jokes, but you know, they call it by a certain name because it looks a certain way, or people make fun of it or whatever. But it was funny to talk about that. It was interesting to learn about that particular piece of art, and it cropped up with several of our interviewees, and so we followed that a little bit too. And I thought that really added a bit of a light part to the film. Yeah, and then you know, you find things that your interviewees say that do lead you in other directions that you didn't anticipate. But then in the end, you have to kind of put it together in some sort of way that leads from one thing to another. But in the way we did it, we didn't create that until we had everything in front of us. And it was a matter of putting it together at the end. We knew we had lots of good things. One of the things that helped us to have some continuity is that Chris Latta is a guitar player that we engaged to do music for the film. And Paul and I really like to have music that's connected to the story and that's local and part of the scene here. That was part of what we really wanted to do. We actually wanted to have a number of musical artists in the film, but time and finances meant that we kind of whittled it down to one, Chris. And in a way, we were very glad it worked out that way because he was great and kind of added a feeling to the overall look of the film.
Derek, any reflections from your side about this this process of telling the story and kind of deciding what to keep in your film and anything you had to leave out?
Yeah, I mean, so we did a single interview with Kaylee's mom, Alicia, and I mean, Brian was the director, but also the editor of the film. So honestly, you know, as I was there every shoot, just like Brian and Nick were, and there wasn't a ton that I remember that was cut out from the film. Obviously, there's certain scenes that get shortened and you film for hours and they're shortened. And, you know, the interview was an hour and a half and that's shortened. But the pieces, I mean, I think this goes for every, you know, good editor and good director, is you're working to know what the best things are. And to Brian's credit, you know, we did the birthday scene to get to know Kaylee first. And then to my recollection, we did the interview. And then Brian took that and we filmed everything else after that. So he had a good foundation of what he kind of visualized for the film, and then was able to kind of let us know so I could plan that out and Nick could film it to best represent that. And of course, you know, some things were lucky, we'll call them, along the way. You know, the hospital visit that you see, the aquarium that you see in the film. I mean, those were leaps that we took to get access to that made the film better. But ultimately, those ideas came from Brian and Nick and I chatting and deciding, okay, this is the interview, what goes best with this scene. So there was a lot of capturing it candidly, a lot of the moments, but there was a lot of planning it out as if it were, you know, what we're used to, which is a commercial and having everything planned. So a little bit different of approach to a documentary for sure.
Yeah, and it sounds like you both worked really closely with some collaborators. Derek, you talk about the director Brian and Nick, the DP, and Tom, you've talked about your I think co-director, is that right? Paul Campbell.
Yes, Paul Campbell. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I want to hear more about, you know, what is something that you value from working together, that maybe you learned from making this film, because it's you know, working with different people, I think we all know is very important. So I want to hear a little bit about, you know, specifically this film, how did that collaboration kind of make this film what it is? What's the magic sauce in this collaboration?
Oh, the sauce, yes.
Yes, the street sauce. No,
Indeed.
Tom, why don't you go first?
Okay, well, Paul and I started working about 10 years ago. I've been involved in television for a long time, and Paul's been a career filmmaker. And so Paul has a very strong and capable sense of how to structure film. And we both edit and we both direct. We do everything together, but Paul is very good at the whole scene. And so he's kind of first editor, and I you know, critique, and we work together to make new versions of what we come up with. And we kind of know now what each of us can do. And that's a help, actually. You don't have to be able to do the same thing, each of you. It's about what you can each bring and cover all the bases. So I rely on him a lot, but together we're kind of better than either one of us alone, or, you know, some of the parts kind of thing. Yeah. What else did I want to say about that? I don't know.
That's beautiful. It's
I
beautiful. Derek?
I'll echo Tom's kind of phrase here and say that, you know, the reason why we did this passion project to make this film was not only because there was some sentiment behind it with Nick's backstory, and, you know, we wanted to do something good, but also we knew that it would work because we work in a commercial environment, typically with a few more people, but we have worked on projects where it was just Nick, Brian, and I, and we had a recipe for success. Now, this project in particular, Brian edited and directed. Some projects I'll direct, some projects Nick might direct, but he's typically a DP. But we all have that mindset of where a project can go and can add ideas along the way. So my 2 cents for anyone that's watching is having other people will add skill sets and value, which is great, but they'll also push you to finish the thing. And that's even more important because then you're accountable to somebody.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It's so important. I've you know, when I first started in my filmmaking journey, like the first thing I made, I did it myself because I didn't know any better. And after that project was finished, I vowed to never work alone because it's just not sustainable. And I really I really relate to what both of you said. You know, it's the value of bringing people together and combining forces, and it really, like, the product speaks for itself. It's better than the sum of its parts. You know, it's a famous saying for a reason.
Right. Yeah, and what Derek said too about when Derek said, I knew it would work, I had kind of a similar moment with this. And you have to pay attention to that, I think, sometimes. If you can see that something's going to work, you know, go ahead and follow it and do it, even though it might be risky. Yeah, I could see that public art would be a good topic generally, and for a general audience. And I could also see that visually it would be a strong source of material. That together made me think that our film could work. But just that idea of following what you really think is going to work or what you think is important and sticking to it if you can, you know, I would encourage anyone to try to do that. That's
really great advice. Thank you. Next, I want to talk a little bit about COVID-19. It's kind of where we live now. 2020, you know, a lot of things have happened to change the way that we relate to each other, the way we watch films, the way we make films. So I want to hear a little bit about, you know, broadly how that has impacted your work in filmmaking, and what your hopes are, you know, going forward in this situation. Let's start with Derek.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very apparent part of all of our lives. I don't want to get too in the thick of things. It's obviously affected every film set, period. I think is just the general note consensus. It makes a lot of things harder. It makes doing, you know, close interaction things more difficult, but I try to have a positive spin on everything. There's always a good outlook and the way to overcome that, or maybe you just shift what you're doing. I will share a story of how, you know, if we're talking about how COVID has impacted things. So Inhale is done. We have finished it. You know, we're in film festivals. I have a feature that I've been working on for a while. It's been about 1.5 years with other collaborators. And the one thing that COVID has impacted the most right now is the fact that that was a travel heavy film, and a lot of traveling to finish off in the States. So being in London and having, traveling before was already hard enough with scheduling and on their end and our end. But now COVID has pretty much made it impossible for us to finish that end of it. So, I'm, as the director of that film, revisiting what we can do to, finish the film ultimately, and how that changes what the film is going to look like at the end of the day. So, that COVID definitely has an impact on stuff like that.
Well, we finished our film in February, and then COVID hit, and so it was, it was an odd moment. And of course, zip up to now, it feels like, well, it's still here, and I don't know what to say about how that's going to affect filmmaking and this kind of project, except that it makes it all harder, like Derek just said. I do know that in the past few months, I've had a chance to work on more online projects. So I've done some video work for fundraising, online virtual fundraising things, and a vodcast, a multi-part vodcast. And this is great. Doing something with the time that we have now that's online, producing materials online that aren't, if you're using Zoom, let's say, to film an interview, it is what it is. But kind of turning your talents to creating something there, regardless of the media, I think is not such a bad idea.
Yeah, and the one thing I'll add too, just building on that, is like for the filmmakers that are used to working what I would call in smaller crews, is like, this is your time to take advantage of that, really. Is like, if you're used to 2, 3, 4 person crews, like there's going to be a giant need, that there already is a need from, festivals and streaming platforms to make content. Like now seems like a good time to try out that passion projects that you've been waiting for. We're 8 months, 9 months deep into COVID, but like do it over the winter, like just do it now.
Yep. Makes sense.
Yeah, I'm getting super inspired by both of your reflections and your tips. Now we're coming to the end of our discussion here. Before we close, I want to ask you both what's next for you.
Well, good question. As I say, I think these online vodcasts are really interesting to me. But in terms of another film project, Paul and I have discussed the fact that we like music, combined with film, and focusing on that. And we really want to stretch our filmmaking skills too. So we're thinking that we'd like to find more artists in our community and profile some of them, and do it in ways where the film itself, the visual, can kind of reflect the kind of art and the kind of experience that those professionals or those artists are trying to create. So something along those lines would be what we'd want to do. Derek, what about you? What's next for you?
Well, I mean, let's put the commercial side, put that aside for now, and, look at passion projects. I've been putting off or very poorly running my personal YouTube page. So that's definitely a focus now, having to put more time into that. And then the feature doc that I mentioned, it's not a secret. It's called Road to the Show. It's a documentary about players as they get drafted into the NHL and what they go through. The plan is for it to be a feature. Who knows? That could change. Depending on when that gets finished, there is talks of a series with the current team that produced Inhale to do. Just time right now is, we're already pretty stretched. So taking on a series like that would be great. But yeah, I don't know. Stay tuned. You might see a series. You might see the feature doc. You might see nothing. I don't know. Who knows?
So thank you very much to the both of you for being in this chat. It's really great to have the opportunity to get to talk to you, to talk about the process of making these films that were featured at the Ottawa Canadian Film Festival, and to hear a little bit about your reflections on being a filmmaker and storytelling in general. It's been a really rich discussion, so I thank you for your time. For those who are watching, we have another weekend of the Ottawa Canadian Film Festival coming up, so be sure to check out the lineup. You can see the films on OCanFilmFest.ca. And finally, I will say a word of thanks to our sponsors, the City of Ottawa and the Ontario Arts Council. So thank you very much. Have a good evening.